Pablo, welcome to London. The obvious question, can Podemos win the election?
I think it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you. We are great admirers of your work, so it's a pleasure to have this conversation. Straight away, could Podemos win? Yes. If by winning we understand winning the next elections, yes, we are in a historic juncture where actually for the first time in decades in Spain, an option that is, let's say, more progressive to the left, more radical, whatever you call it, of the Social Democrats, are in a position where statistically and demographically we can win this election. Then the real question is, what does winning mean in a country inside the Eurozone, inside the European Union, inside NATO, for instance, and what are the margins of action what are the levers that we have in order to give the real battle, the battle against austerity, the battles against neoliberalism.
Okay, so the story so far is Podemos Unidos is now an alliance between your party and the smaller traditional far left party. Suppose you either come first or second and the Social Democrats agree to form a coalition. What realistically can you achieve?
Well, there is a first step to that, which is the Social Democracy making a choice between entering a coalition government with an anti-austerity agenda or becoming the nice, let's say, pillar of a big coalition in Spain. That is the decisive scenario in the short term. You mean a grand
coalition with the old Conservative Party?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like in many other European countries. So that I think it's a moment of European relevance, because this will have a big impact on the political landscape where the Social Democracy is almost everywhere, let's say, within this tension between what to do.
Well, in Germany it's signed up to austerity with Merkel, in Slovakia it's signed up to anti-migrant racism, in France it's hitting people on the head with a riot police.
Destroying the conditions of possibility of their own discourse.
Yeah, they die, basically.
Yeah.
In Spain, you think it's possible that Pedro Sanchez can actually make that move and form a coalition with you guys?
I think that is possible. That is one option. But I think that the choice is going to be compulsory, obligatory. They will have to make it. And I think that will have an impact on the whole European scene. Then, if they go for a coalition with us, what can be done? I think that we need to face a strategy of building up broad coalitions which cannot be only ideological. They need to be political, they need to be social. A broad, complex network with one aim. Basically, overturning the authoritarian dogma and having enough leverage on that correlation of force to go to Brussels, not with the agenda of a political party, but with, let's say, a systemic assault on Brussels in order to overturn the Growth and Stability Pact.
So look, I was in Greece, we saw Syriza go to power. They had what looked like mass support. What would be different this time? How much more organic could it be for Podemos to go to power with its networks behind? And to be honest, the networks of social democracy, for example in Andalusia, where they are strong in society. Yeah. What does it mean to go to power with the networks with you?
Well, the main issue in relation to Greece is that Greece was a first step and it was political. Brussels wanted to send a political message, a warning message, especially to the Spanish society, but not only. What is the difference? Loneliness versus the next step. And the next step means that there is the government in Portugal, which is facing that battle. There is a situation of political instability in Ireland. There is this radicalization to the right in many different societies. And there is a deep crisis of management, so to speak, of social democracy in Italy and in France. Yeah. So within that broad landscape, it will depend on our ability to be able to rally and to gather and federate those forces with one common goal. Yeah.
What's the one thing you will say to the European Commission, to the European Central Bank? What do they have to do?
The main thing we will say it's about time. It's about time. It's going to be a battle over deadlines, basically. It was in the Greek case as well. The main difference is that we, unlike the Greek government in that stage, we are not in the middle of a liquidity or solvency crisis. Spain is not bankrupt, and Spain is able to finance itself. So we can buy time. It's going to be a battle much more political over the management of time. If we need to be able to put on the agenda the issue of basically the Growth and Stability Pact, of the deficit, of public spending, and basically fighting against the penalties for overspending.
But as we know very well in this country, in Britain, even though we're not in the Growth and Stability Pact, the treaty mandates austerity. That's the problem. There's never been a situation where an anti-austerity government with some power and with some networks behind it says, we're going to break the treaty.
We're in a paradoxical situation, of course, but it's not historically new. Of course, we don't choose the battleground of the fights that we need to have. We don't choose this architecture of the European Union, of the European Central Bank, of the whole European economic and financial system. But we need to be able to reverse those structures, and that of course means forcing the direction in which they have been going for decades now. It's very difficult, but it was done. I say it's not historically new because the structures of the state were oppressive for the working class, for instance, and through the fight, through the battle, they were able to reorient the action of public policies, of the public investment in the economy and so forth. I think we are at a similar level, except at an international stage, in the sense that there is I think the main framework is a big decisive battle between democracy and austerity, which is a phase of capitalism, and we need to be able to have enough leverage to intervene on those financial centers, financial flows of capital and so forth. It can only be done at that level.
I remember sitting in a room with Alexis Tsipras just over a year ago and saying to him, what if the Europeans smash you? And one of the problems with Syriza is that they never wanted to contemplate that. What if it comes to an absolute fight? You're from a different tradition. Podemos was born on the streets, so the same question applies to you. What if, despite the moral power, you come to power and Juncker and Schäuble and Dijsselbloem do the same thing and they try to smash that government? What are you going to do?
Well, I think that in order to understand the tactical complexity of the situation, one needs to understand this awful expression, systemic risk.
Yeah.
Spain is, in a certain sense, too dangerous to repeat that. It would be suicidal
It's
to
going to
repeat
blow
that
up the
strategy.
European banking system.
It could get to that point. You can never underestimate the degree of irrationality of those trying to preserve an order that is in itself irrational, like the order of austerity right now. I think that we, of course, need to contemplate the scenario in which a clash is inevitable, but at the same time, we cannot reveal our cards beforehand.
What is the danger? Let's look at some of the problems of left government in Spain. Already, it's been a long journey from the Puerta del Sol and from the streets of Barcelona and all the other cities to the Cortes and to running through cities. And some of your own supporters are already worried, like many of Syriza's supporters, that it's too far, it's too moderate already, that you've lost control, lost touch with the people. What can you tell me about the way Podemos' leadership is thinking about that?
Well, there is, of course, a huge danger, which we are now living in first person, about the ability of the institutional level of politics to normalize you on the outside, the perception that people have, and to normalize you in the inside, in the inner workings, the temporality of your action, the way you frame your discourse in terms of communication and so forth. That is an actual risk that belongs to the very fact of doing institutional politics. At the same time, I think that we are facing, so far, there have been so many times in which people said, this is the end of this movement, this is it's losing momentum or it's losing its essence and so forth. And now we are facing our 6th election campaign, I think, and what we see in the streets is that the wave keeps growing in a certain sense. Yeah. So the problem appears in its full intensity when you reach power. Yeah. How do you relate to the streets in that moment?
But it does lead to this problem about the state. We can talk about NATO, but the Spanish state, historically, is a much more present fear for the Spanish left than the Greek left. The Greek left kind of knew there wouldn't be a coup. But in Spain, many of your supporters look at the Spanish state, and this is an unreformed, full of ex-fascists. What are you going to do?
I think there is a for good reasons, for good historical reasons, but there's a lot of mythology about that too, given the 20th century in Spain. I think our society is mature enough and democratic enough, and it's showing it once and again to rule out that possibility, exclude it materially. The problem is not that one. The problem is how can you maneuver, how can you actually govern when you have a structure of the state that is going to be hostile to you, especially in the judicial system, in the security forces, the army, and so forth. That's why we have been implementing this strategy of trying to seduce and attract the most progressive elements of that establishment, basically, of civil servants and so forth in each of these domains. And I think it's having an effect. I think we are advancing. But the problem is, how do you maneuver this immense machinery that basically doesn't want you? And the biggest frustration, what they tell us from the city halls, for instance, we are governing, is how slow that process can be, from the moment you take a political decision to the moment it can get out of the institution so that your own people can start to see things happening. That is my biggest fear and the biggest challenge, because you don't have that long.
What about NATO? Spain's a part of NATO, it's an active part, it's a big part of NATO. What are you going to do?
Well, you know that NATO is at the core of the identity of the modern left in Spain in a very traumatic manner, because we lost that referendum. And it has become almost a dogma, a dogma of identity to proclaim, in order to be a leftist, no to NATO. But actually, from a position of powerlessness, because there is no way to do it, basically, because you don't have the correlation of forces to do it. What we proposed in our platform, in our program, is to advance on the issue of European defense as a way out, combining a harsh criticism of the role of NATO with trying to get a way out, politicizing the question of Europe, the issue of Europe.
Which brings me to just a final question, two questions. Britain, here, we're in the middle of a Brexit referendum. The left split. Some of them want to stay, some of them have been historically anti-EU. What would you say to the British left? What should they do in this referendum?
I'm not here to give advice, but my analysis is that, as I was mentioning before, the main conflict, the decisive issue that we have ahead of us is this conflict at the international level between the possibility of building democratic structures to control, finance, flows of capital and so forth, and basically austerity. So I think that only in the perspective of a broad alliance at that level, we will be able to gain margins of autonomy in order to have progressive policies of social redistribution, social justice, and so forth. The actual architecture of the European Union prevents that. It's constitutionally designed to make that impossible. But as I was saying before, if we don't give the political battle within those structures at that level, I think that the field will be much more fertile for signification of sovereignty that is beneficial to the far left, to the far right. Because it is a discourse of social order, not of social justice, that imposes itself on this retreat to national sovereignty.
What can Podemos say to the centre in Spain, with all the enmity that there is between the left and the centre, about what is your appeal to the last person who's going to flip from voting from PS or even Ciudadanos to you? What do you say to the centrist voter?
I would say that there is a very dangerous move, precisely talking about the center right now, an ideological move, trying to play this discourse about the extremes, right? The populist extremes, and we have to prevent from falling one to the other. But actually I would say that what we are doing is defending the core values of the European project itself. I mean, equality, fraternity, freedom, all of these are at risk and are actually being at the center of this battle that is going on. It is not ideological in itself, it's political. Social rights, human rights, they were not invented as an ornament for times of stability and prosperity. They were invented precisely for times like this. So I would say that it is the very fate of what we understood, what the historical common sense of our society is understood to be the core values of our living together that are at risk, basically, that we are facing a historical time in which we are at the edge of a new form of abyss that reminds us of the worst nightmares of our European history. So I would say it's not the center versus the extremes, it's actually common sense versus the abyss.
Speaking of which, Jeremy Corbyn, we had this almost accidental but massive takeover of our own Social Democratic Party by the most left-wing two MPs that it ever had, to be honest, Corbyn and MacDonald and Diane Abbott. You know, what is your message to Corbyn from Podemos?
Please win. That would be my message, because it would be, I was talking before of Spain as a systemic risk. I think that a political change of that depth in Great Britain could be absolutely decisive to displace the center of European politics as where it is now, and actually to open huge spaces, open room for giving that battle, the battle for Europe, not for the European Union, the battle for Europe as a project of civilization, so to speak, as a project of, social justice, social rights, and human rights, the basic core of our own identity as societies.